The coffee was cold again. She didn't even notice as she squinted at the screen, the glow painting tired shadows under her eyes. Outside the Green Bank Observatory window, the West Virginia mountains slept under a blanket of stars, sharp and clear in the thin mountain air. Inside, it was just her, the low hum of ancient computers, and the endless stream of cosmic static pouring in from the giant dish pointed at the sky. Another late night. Another long shot. That's what SETI work was. Mostly waiting, mostly noise. She'd been at it for years, listening to the universe's background hum, hoping for, well, hoping for something that never came. Just static, glitches, and the occasional satellite burp. She almost hit delete on the latest data file. Just another blip. But something made her pause. A tiny, almost invisible hiccup in the 1.42 gigahertz's frequency, the hydrogen line, the frequency. Scientists had always figured any civilization smart enough to reach out would use this basic cosmic landmark, the natural radio whisper of the most common element in the universe. It was like leaving a note on a universal bulletin board. She sighed, rubbing her temples. Probably just a glitch in the old Green Bank receiver. Happened all the time. She ran the standard checks, recalibrated the filters, checked the weather logs. Clear skies. No interference. Even reran the noise-canceling software. The hiccup didn't go away. It was persistent, like a heartbeat hidden in the static. Her fingers moved slower now, less automatic, more deliberate. She isolated the signal, stripping away layers of cosmic noise. And there it was, not random, not a satellite, a pattern, simple, clean, almost mathematical, prime numbers. 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, counting upwards in radio waves. Her breath caught. Okay. That's weird. Really weird. Prime numbers? That wasn't natural. Nature didn't count in primes like that. Her heart started thumping a little louder than the computer fans. She pulled up the raw data stream, her eyes scanning line after line of numbers. There it was again, repeating after the primes. A faint, distorted image. Pixelated, messy, but undeniably there. It looked like a spiral, a galaxy, but not the Milky Way. She knew the shape of our home galaxy in her sleep. This was different. Tighter arms, a brighter core. She cross-referenced it instantly, with every known deep space image in the database. Nothing matched. Nada. Zip. It was a stranger in the night. A cold prickle ran down her spine, unrelated to the observatory's air conditioning. This wasn't just weird. This felt intentional, like someone had carefully placed a coded message in the cosmic noise. She leaned closer, her nose almost touching the screen. Buried deeper in the signal structure, woven into the timing of the pulses themselves, was something else. A timestamp, not in seconds or minutes, but in something vast, light years. Her fingers flew over the keyboard, translating the signal's internal clock. The math was solid. Standard astrophysics. The signal had been traveling for a very, very long time. 1,342 years. Sent from a point deep in the constellation Ophiuchus, over 1,000 light years away, meaning whatever sent it did so around the year 685 AD, back when humans were barely out of the Dark Ages on Earth. The sheer age of it hit her like a physical weight. This wasn't a live call for help happening right now. This was a message in a bottle, thrown into the ocean of space centuries ago, finally washing up on Earth's shore. She sat back, suddenly dizzy. The cold coffee sat forgotten. The quiet hum of the observatory felt different now. Not peaceful, but charged, like the air before a storm. An SOS. The word popped into her head, unbidden. It wasn't a word in the signal, of course, but the feeling, the desperate repetition, the strange, lonely image of that unknown galaxy. It felt like a cry, like something, somewhere, long ago, had reached out into the dark, hoping against hope that someone, anyone, might be listening. And Earth, by some impossible cosmic accident, was listening. Right at this moment, 1,342 years later. The thought was staggering. She wasn't just looking at data. She was holding a piece of history from another world. A history that was already ancient dust by the time the signal began its journey. Panic tried to bubble up. Tell someone. Call the director. Call NASA. Call the president. But years of scientific discipline clamped down hard. Not yet. One mistake, one false alarm, and this could blow up into chaos, or worse, get dismissed as junk science. She needed proof. Solid, unshakable proof. She ran the analysis again, and again. She pulled in archived data from the past week, checking if the signal had been there all along. Hidden. It had. Faint, but consistent. She called up the signal profile from the Very Large Array in New Mexico. Could they see it too? The data was there, weaker, but matching. Her hands were shaking slightly now as she emailed the raw files to 3 other trusted colleagues at different observatories, one in Australia, one in Germany, one in Chile. Strictly confidential. Just the data. No theories. Check this. Please. Tell me I'm not seeing things. The waiting was agony. She paced the small control room, glancing at the silent phone, then back at the screen showing the repeating prime numbers. The quiet observatory suddenly felt enormous and lonely. What if it was real? What did it mean? Was it really a distress call? From who? From what? Images flashed in her mind. Not of little green men, but of vast, cold emptiness, and a civilization facing something unimaginable, their final act sending this fragile pulse of hope into the void. The responsibility felt crushing. She was just one person in a small building in the mountains, holding a secret that could change everything humanity thought it knew about its place in the universe. Or it could all be a colossal mistake, a trick of the instruments, a hoax. The thought was almost a relief. Then, the first reply pinged in her inbox. From Australia. Short. To the point. Signal confirmed. Location matches. Pattern is artificial. Repeat. Artificial. Her stomach dropped. Then Germany. Verified. Prime sequence clear. Origin point consistent. This is extraordinary. Chile came last. The email subject line simply, "It's real." 3 independent confirmations. No mistakes. No glitches. The coffee cup rattled as she set it down too hard. It was real. Undeniably. Irrevocably real. The universe wasn't silent. It had spoken. And its voice carried a message of what? Warning? Invitation? Or just the final sigh of something lost? She walked to the window, pressing her forehead against the cool glass. The familiar stars outside looked different now. Not just points of light, but potential homes, potential neighbors, potential something else. The vastness of space, which had always felt like a comforting blanket of mystery, now felt charged with a new, unsettling energy. That tiny, repeating signal on her screen wasn't just data anymore. It was a connection. A thread stretching across 1,000 years and 1,000 light years, tying her little room in West Virginia to a long-dead moment of desperation in a corner of the galaxy she'd never seen. The weight of it settled on her shoulders, heavy and profound. She wasn't just an astronomer anymore. She was the first human to hear a voice from forever. And the quiet observatory wasn't just a workplace. It was ground zero. The silence outside wasn't peaceful. It was the calm before a storm of understanding that would shake the world to its core. She took a deep, shaky breath, the cold mountain air sharp in her lungs. The waiting was over. The real work, the terrifying, amazing, world-changing work, was just beginning. She turned back to the computer, the glow reflecting in her wide, determined eyes. Time to call the director. Time to tell the world it wasn't alone. The galaxy had sent an SOS, and Earth, finally, had heard it. The whisper in the static wasn't noise. It was a lifeline thrown across the abyss, and humanity had just caught it. The news didn't spread like wildfire. It exploded. One moment, the world was scrolling through cat videos and arguing about politics. The next, every screen, phones, TVs, bus stop billboards, flashed the same impossible words. Alien signal confirmed. Origin: 1,342 light-years away. It wasn't some blurry photo or shaky video. It was cold, hard data. Prime numbers. A strange galaxy. A timestamp older than the pyramids. And that word, SOS. People stopped walking. Cars pulled over. Coffee spilled on keyboards. In a Tokyo subway, a businessman dropped his briefcase. The clatter echoing in sudden silence as everyone stared at their glowing palms. Was it real? Could it be real? The sheer, dizzying scale of it hit like a physical blow. Not just aliens who needed help, and they'd been calling for over 1,000 years. Panic didn't roar. It seeped in, quiet and cold. In small towns, church bells rang not for prayer, but for confusion. Parents hugged kids tighter, whispering reassurances they didn't feel. Online, the usual noise vanished, replaced by frantic, overlapping questions. Are they coming? Are they dangerous? Why now? Conspiracy theories bloomed like poisonous weeds. Government cover-ups. Alien invasions disguised as distress calls. But beneath the fear, something else flickered. A raw, almost painful hope. Maybe we're not alone in the dark after all. Maybe someone else is out there, looking up at their stars, wondering the same thing we do. Governments scrambled. Locked doors slammed shut in capitals worldwide. Inside the UN building in New York, the air felt thick enough to choke on. The Security Council chamber, usually a stage for polished speeches, became a pressure cooker. Faces were pale, eyes shadowed from sleepless nights. The American delegate, voice tight, laid out the data. The signal, the location, the crushing distance. A Chinese official immediately pushed back. Convenient timing, they snapped, suspicion sharp in their voice. Why reveal this now? What advantage does the West gain? Russia's representative scoffed, calling it a fancy hoax designed to scare nations into handing over space tech. Old rivalries, barely hidden under treaties, surged to the surface. Trust, already thin, felt like tissue paper. The scientists in the room, the ones who'd actually heard the signal, felt like ghosts. They'd spent their lives chasing this moment, and now it was drowning in politics. They tried to explain the simple truth. This is real. We checked. It's not a weapon. It's a message. But their words got lost in the shouting. What do we do? Demanded an ambassador from a small island nation, her voice trembling. They sent an SOS. Over 1,000 years ago. By the time we could even think about sending help, whoever sent it is long gone. Dust. Why bother? The despair in her question hung heavy. Was this just a cruel, cosmic joke? A tombstone message echoing across the void? Then, The turning point. Not in New York, but under the vast, clear skies of Australia. The massive dishes of the SKA Low telescope, designed to listen to the faintest whispers of the early universe, locked onto the same frequency. And they heard it too. Clear as day. Prime numbers. The strange galaxy. The timestamp. The confirmation pinged into the UN servers just as the arguing reached its peak. Silence fell over the chamber, broken only by the frantic typing of aides verifying the new data. Minutes later, another ping. India's upgraded giant metrowave radio telescope had also confirmed it. Then Chile. Then Germany. The signal wasn't a fluke. It wasn't a Western trick. It was everywhere, heard by friends and rivals alike. The undeniable truth landed like a stone in still water. This was real. For everyone. The arguing didn't stop, but the ground shifted. The "is it real?" fight was over. Now came the harder question. What now? The distance was the killer. 1,342 light years. Voyager 1, humanity's farthest traveler, would take tens of thousands of years to get there. Our fastest probes crawled. Building a ship fast enough was pure science fiction. Impossible. The despair threatened to swallow the room whole. Giving up felt like the only option. But then, a quiet voice from the European delegate cut through the gloom. "We cannot reach them in time to save them," she said, her words careful. "But we can answer. We can say, 'We heard you.' We can say, 'You were not alone in your final moment.' We. It wasn't about rescue anymore. It was about respect. About honoring that desperate call across the unimaginable, dark. It was about saying, 'We see you. We remember you.' The idea took root. Fragile, but stubborn. Not a war fleet. Not a colonization mission. A memorial convoy. A message in return, carried by ships, built not for conquest, but for witness. A promise. Your voice mattered. The arguments shifted again, but this time, towards how? Building anything that could even try to cross interstellar space was a mountain taller than Everest. Where to build? How to fund it? Who gets to go? The politics were still thorny. China and Russia, initially hostile, saw a chance for global prestige, to be part of humanity's greatest gesture. The EU pushed hard for transparency. The US offered its lunar infrastructure from the Artemis program. Slowly, painfully, a fragile agreement formed. The United Nations Interstellar Initiative, its sole purpose, build and launch Project Beacon. The real work began not in starship factories, but in committee rooms and secure video calls. They couldn't build magic ships. They had to work with what existed, what was being built now. The key was the moon. Construction was already happening there for lunar bases, mining ice, building habitats. Could they adapt that? Could the heavy lift rockets meant for Mars be modified? Could the life support systems for a moon base be scaled up for a decades-long journey? Engineers pored over blueprints, their faces lit by screens showing lunar craters, not starfields. They realized the answer wasn't speed, impossible, but endurance. Ships that could drift for centuries, powered by steady fusion reactors, shielded by layers of moon dust to block deadly space radiation, carrying crews in deep sleep for most of the trip. Their weapons? Not lasers for war, but powerful lasers to push against space dust, or to flash signals across the black. Defense, not attack. A flashlight in the dark, not a sword. Choosing the crew was its own heartbreak. Not soldiers, not celebrities. The best scientists, engineers, doctors, linguists, artists. People who could keep the mission alive for generations. Who could carry the weight of representing all humanity. Thousands applied. The selection process was brutal, intimate. Interviews focused not on technical skill alone, but on resilience, compassion, the ability to live confined with others for years, maybe decades, before even sleeping for centuries. Could they handle the crushing loneliness of the void? Could they wake up centuries later to a dead world and still find meaning? Families said tearful goodbyes, knowing they'd never see their loved ones again. A mother in Brazil filmed a final message for her daughter, her voice thick. "Go tell them. Tell them we sent our love." Buildings started secretly, high on the moon's far side, hidden from Earth's prying eyes. Not to hide from us, but to prevent panic, to stop conspiracy theories from derailing the fragile hope. Giant cranes, operated by robots, lifted modules forged from lunar rock. Astronauts in bulky suits welded in the silent vacuum, their breath-fogging visors as they worked under the pale blue glow of Earth. News of the construction leaked slowly, but this time, the story was different. Not fear, but awe. Not battle fleet, but beacon ships. People sent messages, poems, songs, drawings from children, to be stored in the ship's memory cores. A viral video showed kids in Lagos building model rockets out of cardboard, shouting, "We hear you," into the sky. The mission became a symbol, even facing the impossible. Even knowing it was too late to save the sender, humanity chose to answer, to say, "We are here. We are listening." The night before the first ship, the UNSS Kepler, was scheduled to leave lunar orbit. A strange calm settled over Earth. No massive celebrations. No frantic news cycles. Just a quiet, shared understanding. Millions looked up at the moon, a tiny sliver of silver in the sky, and thought of the small fleet gathering in its shadow. They weren't sending soldiers. They were sending messengers, ambassadors of hope across the abyss. The launch wasn't a roar of engines, but a silent, precise burn, visible only as a tiny, steady light moving against the starfield. As the Kepler began its slow journey sunward, using Earth's gravity for a final push, a simple message pulsed from its antenna, aimed back at the stars. "We hear you. We are coming. Hold on." It was a lie, of course. They wouldn't arrive in time. The sender was long gone. But the truth was deeper. Humanity wasn't answering the SOS for them. We were answering it for ourselves. To prove that when a voice cries out in the dark, even across 1,000 years and 1,000 light years, we don't turn away. We listen. We remember. And sometimes, just sometimes, we send a light of our own into the endless night. The ships sailed not towards salvation, but towards meaning. And for the first time in a long time, the vast, silent universe didn't feel quite so empty. It felt witnessed. The dust got in everywhere. Not the soft, fluffy kind you kick up on Earth, but sharp, gritty moon stuff that clung like powdered glass. It coated the inside of helmets, got into the seals of bulky spacesuits, and made teeth grind with every bite of recycled space food. High above the moon's far side, hidden from Earth's view, the Copernicus shipyards weren't some gleaming city in the sky. They were a mess. A raw, noisy human mess of metal and sweat under the silent, star-strewn black. Giant robotic cranes, controlled by engineers back on Earth or by astronauts in nearby habitats, swung massive hull sections into place. Sparks flew as welders. Real people in thick gloves, not robots. Fused plates of lunar steel together in the vacuum. There was no sound out there. Just the vibration traveling up the metal through their boots. A deep, steady thrum that felt like the moon itself was breathing. The work was slow, painstaking. One wrong weld, one tiny crack, and decades of effort could vanish in an instant. Inside the temporary pressurized domes, the air smelled of hot metal, machine oil, and the faint, ever-present tang of recycled sweat. Screens glowed with schematics. But often, It came down to two people leaning over a blueprint taped to a wall, arguing quietly over the best way to route a coolant line, their faces smudged with grime. The ships weren't sleek fighters from old movies. They were stubby, practical, built for survival, not speed. 5 of them, each named after an idea. Not a person. Kepler, Da Vinci, Curie, Tagore, Mandela. They looked like clusters of metal cans welded together. Living quarters, engine blocks, shielded labs, and vast tanks for water and fuel. Their most important feature wasn't hidden in the engine room, but wrapped around them like a blanket, thick layers of compressed moon dirt, regolith. It was heavy, ugly, and the only thing that could stop the deadly cosmic rays that would fry anyone inside within weeks. Loading it was back-breaking work, shoveling the fine gray powder into giant fabric sacks and bolting them onto the hulls. It wasn't glamorous, but it was life. Inside the cramped assembly domes, the tension was thick, but different from the panic back on Earth months ago. This was the tension of doing, of building something impossible. You'd see it in the eyes of the technicians, a mix of exhaustion and fierce pride. An engineer might spend hours calibrating a tiny sensor, her fingers numb inside thick gloves, only to step back, wipe her brow, leaving a gray streak, and crack a tired joke that made the whole team laugh. A young mechanic, barely out of training, might nervously present a repaired component to a veteran, heart pounding, only to get a gruff nod and a, "Good job, kid. Now pass me that wrench." There were no heroes here, just people doing their jobs, knowing the weight of what they carried. The weapons, they hated that word, but the public called them that, were nothing like Earth's guns. Mounted on stubby turrets were powerful lasers, yes, but their job wasn't to shoot enemies. It was to vaporize tiny bits of space junk, dust or pebbles, that could punch a hole in the hull at high speed. Think of them as super-powered windshield wipers for the vacuum. There were also systems to blast out clouds of fine metal pellets, not to attack, but to create a protective cloud around the ship, deflecting even smaller particles. And powerful radio transmitters, loud enough to be heard across the solar system, meant for signaling, not fighting. Every system had a backup, and a backup for the backup. Survival depended on it. During a routine test, one laser misfired, scorching a harmless patch of lunar rock a kilometer away. The crew didn't cheer. They immediately ran diagnostics, triple-checking every connection. Safety wasn't a slogan here. It was the air they breathed, or recycled. Down on the moon's surface, near the construction zone, a small, sealed greenhouse dome held the future. Not flowers, but tiny, hardy plants and soil samples from every corner of Earth. Scientists in lab coats, now perpetually dusty, carefully tended them under artificial lights. This wasn't just for oxygen later. It was a symbol, a piece of Earth's living heart, packed for the journey. A botanist might gently brush a finger over a sprouting wheat stalk, a tiny green spark against the gray lunar landscape visible through the dome's window. "This little guy," she'd murmur to a colleague, "is going further than any plant ever has. Gotta make sure he's strong." It was a small, quiet moment of hope in the middle of the industrial grind. Back inside the main habitat, the mood shifted as launch day neared. The crews, 50 people per ship, a mix of scientists, engineers, doctors, even a couple of artists and musicians, moved through final preparations. It wasn't like a movie launch. No grand speeches in a control room. Just quiet checklists, final hugs in the cramped corridors, the soft beep of medical scanners. Families back on Earth sent messages, not just words, but sounds. A baby's laugh, wind through a forest, a favorite song. These were loaded into the ship's memory banks, alongside libraries of human knowledge, music, and images. A crew member might sit alone in a tiny bunk, listening to the sound of rain on a roof they'd never hear again, tears floating in zero-G as they scrolled through photos of their hometown. The most emotional moment wasn't the launch prep, but the sealing of the time capsule. Not a physical box, but a section of the ship's core memory. People queued up for hours, not to send messages to the aliens. They knew it was too late for that. But messages for the crew who would wake up centuries later, arriving at the dead world. Simple things. Don't forget the taste of fresh strawberries. Look for the Orion Nebula on a clear night. It's beautiful. We sent you because we believed it mattered. One entry was just a child's drawing of a stick figure person holding hands with a star-shaped alien, captioned, "Hi, friend." Reading these, even the toughest engineers got quiet, blinking hard. The night before the Kepler's departure, a strange calm settled over the shipyards. The frantic energy of the final push was gone, replaced by a deep, focused stillness. People moved with quiet purpose. In the main dome, someone started playing a soft melody on a portable keyboard. Not a fanfare, but something gentle, almost lullaby-like. Others gathered, humming along. No one spoke much. They just stood together, looking out the thick viewport. Earth hung in the blackness, a breathtaking swirl of blue and white. Impossibly beautiful, and impossibly far away. It wasn't just a planet anymore. It was home. The place they were leaving forever. The place that had sent them on this impossible errand of hope. One technician, finishing a last systems check on the Kepler's hull, paused. He pulled a small, smooth stone from his pocket, a piece of granite from a mountain back home. He didn't throw it. There was no gravity to make it fall. Instead, he carefully tucked it into a tiny gap in the regolith shielding, near the ship's nameplate. A silent offering. A piece of earth. Literally built into the ship. He touched the cold metal of the hull, just for a second, then turned and walked back towards the airlock, his boots kicking up tiny puffs of gray dust that hung motionless in the vacuum. Launch day dawned under the silent stars. No roaring engines like old rocket launches. The Kepler's fusion drive ignited with a silent, intense blue-white glow, visible only as a brightening light against the black. Inside the ship, the crew felt a gentle, steady push as the engines fired for the long, slow burn to catch Earth's gravity and slingshot them towards the stars. Through the viewports, the moon shrank. Then Earth, that vibrant, fragile marble, grew smaller and smaller, until it was just another bright star in the infinite dark. As the ship cleared the Earth-Moon system, the final message was sent. Not a shout, but a steady, repeating pulse aimed back at the stars, carrying the simple, profound words, "We hear you. We are coming. Hold on." It wasn't a promise they could keep for the sender. That civilization was dust long ago. It was a promise to themselves. A declaration that even in the face of impossible distances and ancient tragedies, humanity chooses to listen. Chooses to reach out. Chooses to send a light into the dark, not because it will be seen, but because it's the right thing to do. The Kepler turned its nose towards the constellation Ophiuchus, a faint star field barely visible against the backdrop of the Milky Way. Ahead lay 2,600 years of silent drifting. Behind, a tiny blue dot, watching them go. The battle wasn't against an enemy. It was against despair. And this small, slow-moving fleet, wrapped in moon dust and carrying the quiet hope of a million voices, had just taken the first step. They weren't warriors. They were witnesses. And they were finally, truly, on their way. The dust of Earth was in their metal bones, and the silence of space was about to hear the steady, hopeful hum of human courage. The quiet started slowly. At first, it was just the absence of Earth's constant chatter. Back in the early days, the fleet's comms array buzzed like a beehive. Daily updates from mission control, news snippets, even the occasional burst of music or a child's birthday message piped through from home. The crew would gather around the main screen during Earth Hour, faces lit by the glow of familiar cities, green forests, blue oceans. They'd laugh at silly pet videos, argue about sports scores, feel a pang when seeing snow fall on a hometown street. But as the months bled into years, and the distance stretched past Mars, then Jupiter, then the edge of the solar system, the signals got weaker. Delays grew from minutes to hours, then days. The lively updates became formal reports. The birthday messages stopped. One day, the screen just went dark. Not broken, just silent. Earth had stopped calling. The silence wasn't empty, though. It was full of the ship's own life. The constant, low thrum of the fusion reactor. The ship's heartbeat. The hiss of air recyclers sucking stale breath and spitting back something breathable. The gentle clink of metal as the hull expanded and contracted in the extreme cold. The soft thump of boots on metal floors as crew members moved between modules. Inside the Kepler, life settled into a rhythm as steady as the stars outside. Work was the anchor. Engineers checked and rechecked the regolith shields for micrometeorite damage, their fingers numb inside thick gloves even in the warm interior. Scientists ran experiments on the tiny greenhouse dome, growing algae for oxygen, testing how plants reacted to constant deep space radiation. Doctors monitored everyone's health, watching for the slow bone loss and muscle weakness that zero-G brought, fighting it with grueling daily exercise routines. Every job mattered. Every bolt tightened. Every sensor calibrated, kept the fragile bubble of life floating in the void. But the silence outside seeped in. Holidays became strange. No fireworks, no family dinners. Just the crew gathered in the main module, sharing whatever small treat they'd saved. A cube of real chocolate. A drop of precious fruit, concentrate in recycled water. They'd try to sing songs, but voices often trailed off, the lyrics forgotten, the meaning lost without the context of home. Sometimes, someone would just stare out a viewport at the unchanging starfield, their reflection ghostly in the thick glass. What were they leaving behind? What was happening back there? Wars? Peace? Had Earth even remembered them? The thought that their mission, their entire reason for being out here, might have been forgotten, or worse, deemed pointless and abandoned, was a cold weight in the chest. One engineer, during a routine hull inspection, found a faded sticker on a maintenance panel, a cartoon Earth with home written underneath, peeling at the edges. He didn't remove it. He just touched it, a silent gesture to the memory. Generations passed. The original crew, the ones who'd waved goodbye to a blue planet, grew old. Some chose to sleep, entering the long cryostasis pods for most of the journey, dreaming of mountains and oceans they'd never see again. Others, too vital to the ship's immediate function, lived out their days in the metal womb. Funerals were quiet affairs. No graves under open sky. Just a moment of silence in the main module, a few words spoken, and then the body, respectfully prepared, placed in the ship's small recycling unit, returning nutrients to the closed loop that kept the living alive. It was practical, necessary, but deeply sad. A young botanist, tending her algae tanks, once broke down sobbing after processing the remains of the ship's first doctor. "It's not how it's supposed to be," she choked out. "People should die on something, not just float away." The older crew members just nodded, their eyes distant. They understood the cost. New faces grew up knowing only the ship. Children born in the cramped medical bay had never felt wind, never seen rain, never walked on anything but metal grating. Earth was a story, like ancient myths. A beautiful, impossible dream told by parents and teachers. Maps showed it as a tiny blue dot, impossibly far away. The SOS they were answering? Just a line in their history lessons. Why were they really out here? Some kids asked. The adults would point to the main comm screen, still silently pulsing its repeating message towards the stars. We hear you. We are coming. Hold on. It was a promise, they'd say. A promise to someone long gone, but also a promise to themselves. To be the kind of people who keep promises, even when no one is watching, even when it seems utterly pointless. It was the ship's creed, whispered in the corridors, written on the walls of the school module. Doubts still crept in, especially during the long stretches between maintenance emergencies. Was the signal even real anymore? Had some cosmic event erased it? Was the destination even there? One scientist, poring over decades of navigation data, made a chilling discovery. Using the latest star mapping, updated by faint signals from Earth-based telescopes they'd just managed to catch years after they were sent, she recalculated the origin point of the SOS. The rogue planet wasn't just drifting. It was moving away from them on its path through the galaxy. More importantly, the signal's timestamp. It meant the civilization that sent it had perished centuries before the signal even reached Earth. By the time the first human heard that faint cry, whoever sent it had already been dead for over 1,000 years. The SOS wasn't a current distress call. It was a tombstone message. A final, fading whisper from a graveyard world. The news hit the ship like a physical blow. The mission's core purpose, to answer a call for help, evaporated. Why were they still going? Why endure the endless monotony, the grief of losing loved ones to the void, the sheer waste of resources? For weeks, a deep lethargy settled over the Kepler. Work slowed. People moved, like ghosts. The greenhouse dome, usually a place of quiet hope, felt neglected. The repeating SOS pulse from Earth's old message felt like a cruel joke. One night, the main lights were dimmed, and the crew gathered not for Earth Hour, but for something rawer. No screens. Just the soft glow of instrument panels and the vast starfield beyond the viewports. An older engineer, his hands gnarled from decades of work, spoke first, his voice rough. We thought we were going to save someone. We weren't. He paused, the silence heavy. But we are going to witness, to say, we saw your light. We heard your last words. You weren't screaming into nothing. Someone listened. A musician, who'd composed gentle melodies for the long journey, added softly, maybe that's the help they needed all along. Not to be rescued. Just not to be forgotten. The words hung in the recycled air. It wasn't the hope they'd started with. It was something quieter, deeper, a duty of memory, a refusal to let the darkness swallow the light completely. Slowly, the rhythm returned, but changed. The work wasn't done for a rescue anymore. It was done for honor, for the unknown beings who had reached out across the abyss in their darkest hour. The greenhouse dome became even more sacred, a living symbol of Earth's spirit, carried into the graveyard. Artists began etching messages onto thin metal sheets. Poems, drawings of Earth's landscapes, simple declarations of, "We remember." Scientists meticulously compiled the ship's entire database. Not just technical logs, but the children's drawings, the recordings of laughter, the taste of strawberries described in words, the sound of rain. It wasn't just a reply to the SOS. It was a time capsule of humanity, offered as a gift to the silence. The comms pulse changed too. Instead of just repeating the original message, it began weaving in new data. The ship's journey log, the cultural archive, the simple, profound truth they'd learned. We arrived too late to save you. But we came. We saw. You were not alone. It was a different kind of SOS now, not a cry for help, but a beacon of remembrance, cast into the same darkness that had claimed the sender. Centuries flowed like the silent drift of the ship. Earth became a legend, a half-remembered origin story. New generations were born, lived, and chose cryosleep, all knowing only the mission. Go to the silent place. Remember, they maintained the ship not out of hope for a savior, but out of respect for the promise. They tended the tiny green shoots in the dome, not for survival alone, but as an act of faith, life, stubbornly persisting in the dead heart of space. The vast, uncaring universe stretched around them, colder and darker than ever. But inside the Kepler, wrapped in moondust and carrying the quiet echo of a million human hearts, the silence wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with the steady, unwavering hum of a promise kept. The battle wasn't against the distance, or the cold, or even time itself. It was against the idea that a cry in the dark goes unheard. And as the ship sailed deeper into the unknown, carrying its fragile cargo of memory, humanity's quiet answer to the void grew stronger with every passing year. They weren't racing against time. They were walking slowly, deliberately, through eternity, saying simply, "We were here. We listened. You mattered." And in the endless black, that was the only victory that truly counted. The long silence wasn't the end. It was the space where meaning grew, deep and quiet, like roots in the dark. The Kepler's engines sighed. Not a roar, not a bang, just a slow, deep exhale of energy after decades of silent coasting. Outside the main viewport, the starfield stopped sliding. Ahead, hanging in the endless black, was it? Not a star, not a planet with oceans and clouds, just cold. A dark, lumpy shape against the Milky Way's glow. The rogue planet. The source. The place that had called out with its dying breath over 1,000 years ago. The crew gathered silently, pressing close to the viewports. No one spoke. No one needed to. The air tasted thin, sharp with anticipation. After 2,600 years of drifting through the void, they were here. Home wasn't behind them anymore. Home was this. The closer they got, the more the planet revealed itself. It wasn't just dark, it was dead. Frozen solid under miles of ice, reflecting no starlight, no atmosphere, no flicker of light. Nothing. Just a tombstone spinning slowly through the interstellar dark. The ship's sensors painted a clearer picture. Surface temperature, -240 degrees Celsius. Radiation levels spiking near the core, residual energy from something long burned out. The crew's hearts sank. They already knew the truth deep down, but seeing it, it was different. The SOS wasn't a live call. It was an echo, a ghost. Whoever sent it was gone, had been gone for centuries, before Earth even heard the signal. The mission they'd lived and died for, literally, generations of them sleeping in cryopods while the ship sailed on, wasn't to save anyone. It was to visit a grave. One of the younger crew members, born aboard the ship and raised on stories of the SOS mission, turned away from the viewport. Her shoulders shook, not with loud sobs, but with silent, shuddering breaths. An older engineer put a hand on her back, his own eyes wet. "We knew," he murmured, his voice rough. "We always knew." But knowing and seeing were two different things. The vast, crushing loneliness of space suddenly felt heavier. They'd traveled further than any human ever had, not to find neighbors, but to confirm that someone, somewhere, had faced the end alone. And screamed into the dark. The ship settled into a slow orbit. Probes were launched. Small, hardy drones, shaped like metal beetles, built to survive the brutal cold. They landed softly on the icy surface, sending back grainy images to the Kepler's screens. There it was. Proof. Not a city. Not even ruins of buildings. But structure. Huge, jagged towers of some dark, non-reflective metal, half buried in the ice. They weren't sleek or shiny. They looked functional, ancient, like the bones of a giant beast frozen mid-stride. The probes moved closer. At the base of one tower, a smooth, circular hatch sealed tight, covered in frost. Inside, faint energy signatures flickered weakly on the sensors. Not power. Just echoes. The last gasp of a dead civilization's technology, holding on for centuries after its creators were gone. The crew watched the live feed in dead silence. Someone let out a shaky breath. They were here, they whispered. They really were here. 1. The decision was made quickly, without debate. They had to go down. Not for science, not for samples, for respect. A small landing pod, built for emergencies, was prepped. 3 crew members volunteered. No one had to ask twice. They suited up in the ship's airlock. Movement slow, deliberate, as the outer door hissed open, revealing the frozen wasteland below. One of them paused. From a pouch on their suit, they pulled out a small, flat stone, smooth, warm, from being carried close to the body. A piece of Earth's granite, brought all this way. Not as a trophy, as a gift. A piece of their home, left on this grave. The pod touched down gently on the ice near the largest tower. Stepping out was like stepping onto the moon of a nightmare. No wind, no sound. Just the crunch of boots on ancient frost and the hiss of their own breath inside helmets. The ice stretched flat and endless under a sky choked with stars. No sun, no moon. Just the cold light of distant galaxies. The towers loomed ahead, silent and immense. Up close, they felt sad, worn down by time and cold. The volunteer crew moved slowly, reverently, like visitors at a cemetery. They didn't touch the hatch, didn't try to force it open. Instead, they did what humans do when faced with loss. They remembered. One crew member placed the granite stone gently at the tower's base. Another knelt and cleared a small patch of ice with gloved hands, then pressed a thin, flexible metal sheet into the frost. On it, etched by hand back on the Kepler, were words in 100 different scripts. Human languages, ancient and modern, spelling out the same simple phrase. We answered. The third crew member activated a small device. Not a weapon, a speaker. From it came a sound that shattered the silence. A child's voice, recorded generations ago back on the Kepler, singing a lullaby from Earth. The words were lost in the vacuum, but the melody, a soft, hopeful hum, vibrated through the ice under their boots. For a moment, the dead world didn't feel quite so dead. It felt witnessed. Back aboard the Kepler, the mood wasn't grief. It was something deeper. Quiet. Solid. They'd come expecting to save someone. Instead, they'd found proof that even the mightiest civilizations can fall, that loneliness is universal. But they'd also proven something else. Someone heard you. They'd kept a promise made by people who'd never see this moment, never know if it mattered. The crew gathered in the main module, the greenhouse dome, glowing softly in the corner, tiny green shoots of Earth life, still thriving after 2,600 years. They didn't need speeches. They just sat together, looking at the viewport where the dead planet hung, and shared stories. Stories of the people who built the ship. Stories of the child whose lullaby was now echoing on an alien ice field. Stories of the simple, stubborn act of listening. The final task was the most important. The memorial sphere. Not a bomb, not a weapon. A smooth, polished orb of titanium forged from the ship's own hull. Inside, sealed forever. A perfect copy of Earth's biosphere data, the DNA, of every plant, animal, and human. Recordings of oceans, forests, and city streets. The entire cultural archive they'd carried. Music, and etched on the sphere's surface, in 1,000 languages, the message they'd traveled across time to deliver. You were not alone. It wasn't for the dead. It was for anyone else who might pass this way, millennia from now. A reminder that even in the darkest void, a voice can be heard. As the Kepler prepared to leave orbit, the crew did one last thing. They activated the ship's main comms array, not to send a message back to Earth. They knew no one there would ever hear it, but to send a message forward, into the dark where they'd come from. They wove their own journey log, their memorial sphere's data, and the simple truth they'd learned into the ancient SOS signal. Now, pulsing steadily from the Kepler's antenna, the signal carried a new layer. We heard you. We came. You mattered. It would travel outward, just like the original SOS, a new beacon of remembrance cast into the galaxy. Not a cry for help, a promise that echoes never truly fade. The engines fired again softly, respectfully, as the Kepler turned its nose away from the frozen grave. Through the viewports, the dead planet shrank, becoming just another dark speck among the stars. No one cheered. No one cried. They just watched it go, feeling the weight of what they'd done. They hadn't fought a battle. They hadn't rescued anyone. But they'd done something harder. They'd shown up. They'd said, "We see you, even now, even here." As the ship drifted back into the silent sea of stars, the crew felt it, a quiet warmth spreading through the cold metal halls. It wasn't the warmth of success. It was the warmth of meaning. They'd traveled further than anyone thought possible, not to conquer, but to connect, to prove that in a universe vast beyond imagining, a single voice calling out in the dark isn't lost. Someone, someday, might just answer. Down in the greenhouse, a young botanist touched a sprout of wheat. Earth's green life, stubbornly growing in a metal can far from home. She smiled. A small, tired thing. Outside, the stars burned cold and bright. But inside the Kepler, carrying its cargo of memory and hope, the silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt full. Full of the quiet hum of a promise kept. Full of the knowledge that even in the deepest dark, being heard is its own kind of salvation. The fleet hadn't brought weapons. It had brought something stronger. The simple, unbreakable truth that you are not alone. And as the Kepler sailed on, leaving a new beacon pulsing behind it, that truth began its own long journey across the years, across the stars, whispering to the void, "We were here. We listened, and we remembered you." That was enough. It had always been enough.